So welcome to Life Conversations with Dr. Amy podcast. We're here to have another conversation. We're going to have a conversation with Miss Janet Sherlund. She comes to us from Massachusetts on the island of Nantucket. I just learned a little history this morning. She's going to be telling us her story. She was adopted at birth, and we're going to learn her adoption story. So, Miss Sherlund, we're going to get right into the conversation
Okay.
about adoption. And you wrote a memoir titled Abandoned at Birth. And we don't often associate, being adopted, as being abandoned, but let's share your story and
Great.
talk about your memoir.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I'd like to say a couple of things. One is that you're right. A lot of people, especially culturally, we like to think of adoption as just a happy sort of hallmark experience, that a baby needs a family, it's adopted by loving parents, and all is fine. And two things can be true at once. You can have a perfectly lovely, fine adopted experience and still have been traumatized by being abandoned and rejected by your birth parent. And I think that is important to understand because we as a culture don't have a realistic view of the experience of the adoptee. We mostly hear about the wants and needs and the morality of the birth parent and the adoptive parent.
Mhm.
We hear about a parent who needs or wants to place a child. They can't or don't want to take care of it. And we often judge them many years ago when I was born, it was their morality. Oh, they had premarital sex. How awful. And now it's often based on their socioeconomic standing or difficulties they're having. And we're judging that morally instead of helping support that to what they might need to be able to keep the baby. We also hear about the wants and needs of adoptive parents. They want a child, and we judge them like saints. Oh my gosh, aren't they wonderful? They're taking in a child that's not their own.
Yeah.
But the conversation usually lacks, what does it feel like to be the individual who's traded between those two and grows up with a borrowed identity and separated from their origins and their biological and emotional history, and all that. For people who aren't adopted, they've grown up with people around them who look like them and behave like them. They hear the stories of their family through generations. They It's a physical thing as well. Your blood and your cells recognize your family, your clan. And my experience of adoption and search is to learn how much we are biologically, our sense of belonging is and our identity is. And being handed to strangers when you're an infant, even loving strangers, they are strangers, and it's a traumatic experience for an infant who, for 9 months, up until about the age of 6 months, their sense of safety is a connection to the biological mother.
Mhm. Wow. So, right at birth, I was reading part of your story. You were handed right off right at birth. Your birth mother did not even lay eyes on you.
Yeah, no, she didn't want to see me, and the adoption agency that ultimately placed me found that very unusual. At the time, birth mothers usually helped in some way,
Mhm.
um, you know, say goodbye, connect with, helped care for the child until they were placed. But mine didn't want anything to do with me, didn't want to look at me. And so while I was still in the hospital, I was just cared for by the rotating shift nurses until I was placed in foster care and adopted. So that connection, that for any baby, it's a shock to leave. In utero, we hear our mother's voices and we feel their rhythms, and we are literally connected to them, flesh and blood.
Mhm.
after birth, it's very important to be reconnected with that, the sense of safety and continuum. And babies put in incubators, or certainly babies given away, really feel that the fear and the trauma of, where is the other half of me? Where's the part of me that made me feel safe and whole? And when, like I said, love in adoption, love is not enough. It's wonderful to have. Don't get me wrong; it is absolutely so important. But unless the trauma is recognized, unless the otherness of the child is recognized, that and again, I hesitate to use the word child. Adoptee, the very word adoptee makes people think of a child, but I'm an adoptee and I'm an old lady. I mean, we grow up to be strong individuals, and we are not infants anymore, and we should not be infantilized. But we are. In 40 states, birth records are still sealed, and we are being told we're not allowed to know our origin stories or authentic identity. I grew up, with the name and of my adopted parents, including their name on my birth certificate, and that's not true. They didn't bear me; they raised me. But the sense for the adoptee, the physical feeling that you are different from, other than the family you're growing up with. And those of us born in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, whose birth records are still closed, may never know who we are, what our ethnicity is, what the story of our parents were, why we were placed for adoption, or any connection to our historical biological family. And I think that has to be recognized and talked about, which is happening more now that we are dealing with open adoptions often, and you have DNA testing. But I think adoptive parents have to understand it's no reflection on you, and it's separate from that child's love for you. But the need to know, that just intrinsic need, the intuitive need to know who we are and where we came from, just drives your sense of self and your identity. And without that, you can't form a strong sense of self. And adoptees have 4 times the suicide rate, and they're highly represented in the penal system and in addiction and mental health hospitalizations. This is a real trauma. It's culturally unrecognized, because everyone thinks it's a fairy tale story, but it's not. And I'm not saying we do away with adoption, or we don't, or we aren't grateful for and appreciate our adoptive families, but we have to be recognized that we are other people, we are other people's children, and we need to know where we came from, and there needs to be respect for our origins in order to give us the basic building blocks of forming a sense of self and being a strong and integrated person as we grow.
Definitely. So how old were you? You said you went into foster care. How?
Just for a month. Yeah, I was fortunate that I was adopted when I was about 5 weeks old. And some of my siblings were as old as 4 months, or even 6 months when they were adopted. Um, and we always knew it was part of our bedtime story. Going to the agency, and our parents picking us up. We didn't really talk about what that meant. It was a fact. Okay, we all came from an agency. But we never talked amongst ourselves about what it felt like or what that meant. And, again, back in the 50s and early 60s when I was young, people didn't talk about a lot of things. But also back then, I think the feeling was that nurture was the biggest component of a person's formation. And my experience, especially having late in life found my biological family, that it is not nature, it is nurture. And
Mhm.
and to not know, sometimes when I'm speaking with non-adoptees, and different things resonate with different people, but sometimes if you say to someone, can you imagine never having seen your mother's face? They go, well, no, I can't imagine. And it's like, well, yeah, and when you think about, there's this just a strong, it's almost a physical pull, I think, to try and get back to our origins, and to understand who we are. And it's especially that connection to your birth mother.
Mhm.
Uh, the soldier dying on the battlefield calls out for his mother. No, there is just the strongest beyond, I think, words or understanding. And I think
Mm.
when that bond is broken at birth, that there is just almost a compulsion to try and find that again and reconnect in order to almost give you the strength to continue on or to learn to realize who you were. There's also, there were four of us in my family growing up, all adopted, and
Mhm.
everyone deals with it differently. Some people numb it. Um, some people deny it. Usually, at some point in life, that catches up with you, though, and some people are just compelled into it. And I think, I sort of saw various reactions within my own family, but it's whether or not it's dealt with, it's an underlying trauma. And I think the more open and honest we are about it, the better it will be for everyone, even those who have a hard time facing up to it.
Yeah. So at what age did you start getting eager to learn about your birth mom?
I don't ever remember not wanting to know. So I mean, as young as I was, I can remember instances of being like 5 years old and wondering who she was and where she came from, where I came from. Why do I look like I look? Where did I come from? Why was I given up?
Hmm.
It's a very profoundly disturbing fact to know that your blood gave you up. You
Yeah.
know, she didn't want me. No one in her family wanted me. Why didn't anyone want me? And but I always knew, and I always wanted to search. But with closed adoption records, there was nothing to search with. There was no DNA testing in those days, and I had no name, no place. I had nothing to go on, and so it just felt like a very frustrating and futile experience. But I mean, I literally looked at every woman's face on the street as I walked by them and wondered, could you be my mother? And whenever someone said, "Oh, you know what you look like," and I'd think, "No, who? Who do I look like? And could that be my mother?"
So you were never with the closed records. You have no clue who your birth family
Nothing,
is,
nothing. And that's still true today in 40 states.
right?
And despite the fact that most of that comes from a culture of shame, why were their records sealed back then? Well, because the birth mother was ashamed of having premarital sex, and sometimes because the adoptive families didn't even want to admit that their children were adopted because there was shame that um, you know, they couldn't have their own children, and so there was a lot of shame on a lot of sides of adoption, and so it was just hushed and made secret. And, let's pretend and let's try and match them as well as we can so that no one has to know. Um, and that comes at the expense of our, meaning adoptees, rights and identity and sense of self. You can't pretend to be somebody else all your life and
Hmm.
not have consequences of that. Uh, and I loved my adoptive parents very much and was very close to them. Um, but I still knew I was someone else.
Hmm.
And I ultimately met those parents and really understood myself for the first time in my life when I did.
Did you ever rebel against
Yeah.
your adoptive parents?
I did not, although it's very common. There are two common reactions to adoption. One is the testing out, pushing back, acting out, rebel, and one is the perfect child, never make any problems, don't risk being given away again. And of the four of us in my family, two were the rebels and pushed back and tested the waters, and two of us just towed the line.
Mm.
Um, I probably more than anyone I wasn't free to be a real person. I was always so afraid of making someone unhappy with me or getting mad at me or not wanting me that I would do anything to please, especially my adoptive mother. And, that's for any child. That's not a healthy way to grow up if you're not free to feel normal emotions or express yourself or to even the things that I seemed intrinsically interested in were not things my adopted mother was interested in. And she kind of she kind of made me feel less than for the things I liked. She was into math and science, et cetera, and I was into the arts. So, uh,
Oh,
I felt that that was not as good as or less than. And so, no, I was unfortunately trapped myself in that, good child role. But I did have a couple siblings who tested the boundaries at every chance they could.
wow. So can you share how this made you go through that sense of loss and grief? Um,
How
with
being adapted did, or how writing the book, being adapted. Yeah. You have these feelings that are really physical. This feeling of I'm different, I'm other. I don't feel really connected with these people. We all feel different. It's sort of like, maybe it can be better explained by, if you're in a room with all family members, you feel a certain level of comfort and acceptance and knowledge. And if you're in a room with friends, you can still feel loved and happy, but it's not that same connection. It's not that same bonding kind of. And so I always felt we all felt different to me. There were six of us around the dinner table. None of us shared blood, and I always felt like we were six different individuals sitting around the dinner table. And I think that sense of disconnection, being untethered, having no knowledge of how I came to be, how I ended up in this family, being aware enough of the process of adoption to know that it was capricious. The reason I ended up in this family was because that's where my name was on the list. I could have been in the family whose name was one down or one up on the list. And so my identity and placement felt very capricious. So everything about my life felt, you know, just random and capricious. And the I developed terrific anxiety. I mean, tremendous anxiety from this sense of not understanding these weird feelings of not being connected, and just everything about my life being so random, and not being able to see myself mirrored in anybody or reflected in any way. And starting at like age 11 through my 20s, I suffered from terrible panic attacks. I mean, really severe, you know life stopping, thought I was dying or going crazy every time I experienced one, panic attacks. And they further limited my life because I was afraid to do new things or different things or independent things, in light of the severity of those panic attacks. I would push myself as much as possible and suffer the consequences, but I think the chronic stress of living with such an unknown sense of self and such insecurity and such feelings of rejection. The primal thing, my parents were loving, my adoptive parents. I don't know why I felt this, but I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't wanted. Someone didn't want me.
yeah,
Someone gave me away. It's like I was a helpless baby. He would give a helpless baby away. And and that I wouldn't have survived if someone didn't take me in. And so um it just was such an unsettling feeling. And for me, I you know suffered a lot with the anxiety that it produced, until I found a therapist who understood that and helped me manage those symptoms in my 20s. But um it was it was a harsh way to go through a very formative part of my life.
yeah. You said that your adoptive parents was loving. I was thinking about that. What about your father? Your adoptive father? Was
My
he?
adoptive father was the best. And as a therapist once said, it only takes one parent to save you. And
Yeah.
my adoptive mother was a brilliant woman, very, loved to do nonprofit work, and she was a teacher and ultimately a minister, and just a pillar of the community, and everyone admired her so much. But she probably should never have been a mother. She was, I think she found it boring, and it wasn't stimulating enough for her. And she felt that disconnect too. We weren't her children. We didn't reflect her.
Hmm.
But my adopted father was just a sweetheart. And I can sum him up with the quote he said to me when I asked him. I was very young, And I asked him if he believed in heaven. And
Mhm.
he replied, I believe heaven is the feeling you leave in other people while you're still here on this earth. And that's the way he lived his life.
Mhm.
And everyone that knew him felt blessed for knowing him and felt respected and appreciated and graced by him. And so I was very fortunate to have him as my dad, and that really saved me.
Wow. And I hear you say you went through therapy. Did you struggle with abandonment issues? Did they help you, the therapy help you realize that that was some of the issues with
Yeah,
you?
I think, therapy always helped for every period of my life that I went through at various periods. And um, I always say to people, it can be difficult to face tough things, but you can get support for it, and the only way out is through. And so you have to go there, but you can't always do that alone. You can feel the feelings, but sometimes they're overwhelming, or you don't understand why you feel them. There were many times that I thought, I'm too old to feel this upset. I should this. My rational brain would think, at certain times during this journey, yeah, gosh, I'm grown up and I've studied this and I've been in therapy and I've read that. Like, I shouldn't feel this so much. And it was therapy that helped me understand what I was feeling and why I was feeling it so deeply, and affirming to me that no, you should be feeling that. These circumstances, it's normal to feel that way. And that would help me allow myself to feel the grief and the loss that my rational self was saying, it doesn't make sense to be feeling this still. Or look at what you have a loving husband and children, you had a perfectly fine placement. Why are you feeling this way? And the things I learned in therapy would really allow me to feel my true feelings, and be really in touch with that. The things I felt growing up, but never understood, and just, suffered with them instead of understanding them and questioning myself, always thinking it was something I did wrong, or I didn't have together. And it would have been lovely to hear it's normal to feel that way in these circumstances, and to have more strength and more and trust myself better in dealing with my own reactions and feelings.
Yeah, I often share my story of being a fatherless child. Even though I knew my father,
Mm.
my biological father, I knew him. He just wasn't present. And I feel guilty now at age 49, feeling the way I do. Like, I tell myself, get over it, Amy. Like, but I still feel like him not being present has some effects on, me not having a healthy relationship with men in my life. It played a part. But
Yeah,
I feel like, why can't I just move forward?
I know. It's funny when we found my birth mother, and she refused to meet me. I
Oh.
was devastated, and I couldn't understand why. I kept saying, "Well, but I'm 56 years old, and and I've read about this, and I understand the shame, and blah, blah, blah." Like, I understood logically and intellectually all this, and I was just devastated, and I didn't understand it. I thought, "What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me that I'm this upset." And then, but there's a wonderful book called The Primal Wound by Nancy Newton Verrier that was written back in the 1990s. And I'd read that many times, but I guess I hadn't remembered this part. It was months later that I was rereading it, and there was a section there about if an adult adoptee, searches and finds a birth parent and they reject him, all the pre-conscious, pre-verbal uh, feelings of rejection and abandonment surface. And so I kind of went, oh, yeah, I knew I was upset and feeling stuff, but I didn't understand that it was because I was reliving a trauma that I didn't have words for, because it happened before I thought in words. And
Mhm.
it triggered all these things. And I think I would have been more understanding of myself and accepting of myself had at the time I understood that these things that we that are beyond intellect, can really affect us. And that no matter how much we learn and know, we have to respect that gut part of ourselves and that feeling part. And even after all I've learned and all I've been through and writing this book and intellectually accepting all the reality of what it is to be adopted and integrating that with my biological self and um someone asked me a month or so ago, and my birth mother has now passed away as well, if you
Okay.
could have one more conversation with her, what would you say? And she never accepted me. And I just off the top of my head said, I would tell her I still want her to want me. Now,
Wow.
I mean, so I'm much stronger and much more integrated and so happy with all the work I did to face everything and get here and pull all that information together. And it's what keeps me going now and gives me the strength and affirms who I am and what I've been through. And yet there's still that child in me that when
Hmm.
really asked and I speak without thinking, I still want my mother to want me. So I hear you. I don't think our intellect controls every part of, and certainly doesn't control our heart. And we just have to, and then I also say, it's like living with grief. You never get over it,
Hmm.
but you just learn to live with it. And
Yeah.
it rears its head at times and then it subsides again, but it's always there.
Yeah. So you did locate your birth mother.
Yes, yes.
Okay, because I thought with the closed records that you couldn't get.
Yeah, the adoption agency I discovered um, in about 2010 did searches so that if you could apply to them, and they certainly had the information about your birth mother and birth parents, and they would reach out to them, and if both parties agreed, they would facilitate a reunion. So I was shocked to discover that, saw it online and filled out the application and waited. And they found her and reached out, and she refused to meet me. So
Oh,
that was heartbreaking. But they also surprisingly had the name of my birth father, which back in the 50s was not required. So they were surprised they had it.
uh-huh.
And uh, and they offered to reach out to him. And I thought, I knew I'd been told that he didn't know I existed. So
Uh,
he had fathered me at age 18 with his high school girlfriend and never knew he had. So it was a big surprise to him at age 75 to get a phone call one night that he had a daughter and she wanted to meet him. Um, but
oh,
his reaction was so different than my birth mother's. His reaction was, if she's my blood, she's my daughter. Of course, I want to meet her. And it was a life changing experience. Again, yet just like my adopted father, it was my birth father who saved me in that experience. And oh my gosh, looking into his face was the first time in my life I made sense. And it was just wonderful.
oh, wow. How old were you when you met your birth father?
56.
Oh, wow.
And it was so physical. I couldn't have answered two questions about him. I really knew nothing about him, but when he looked into my eyes and grabbed my hands and said, "You're Janet," every that big black hole inside me just filled up in an instant. And I made sense for the first time in my life. I was looking into my own blue eyes, and his face was, and I don't even know why, but it was like my cells recognized my kin. It was like my blood knew I was home. It was just the most amazing experience. So, and I
Wow.
continued to have that as I met other family members there. And then I met my birth mother 3 times. She was never warm. She was never accepting. And even while I was with her and she was behaviorally rejecting me, my body felt at home and at peace being near her. There is just this uncanny thing about belonging that is so cellular and so biological. And it was so weird to be sitting next to a woman who didn't want anything to do with me, but I felt like, wow, I'm home. So it was fascinating to go through that.
initially didn't want any contact, but then y'all did have.
Yeah, 5 years into the journey, I let her know that I'd met my birth father and I knew who she was because the agency, of course, didn't tell me who she was, but my birth father did and showed me pictures of her and said how much I looked like her, made him feel 18 again. And I'd reached out about once a year to her through the agency and then directly once I knew who she was.
Oh,
And
okay.
she never wanted to meet me and wouldn't even reply to the things I sent. The agency then suggested that I reach out to my siblings. She had had 5 children after me. And they said, they have the right to know you exist and the right to choose whether or not they want a relationship with you. So I ultimately sent them a letter, all 5 of them overnight, and thought, well, I don't know if I'll ever hear from them. They'll probably be shocked and whatever. And I didn't send it for a long time because I didn't want her to be mad at me. I was still hoping for a relationship with her and I didn't want her to be mad at me for outing her, but I finally did. And the next day I had a phone call and this woman's voice said, "Hello, Janet. This is your sister, Diane." And it was one of my sisters calling to make contact with me. And um, she was just here visiting me last week. I mean, we had all 5 of my siblings were warm and accepting and very inclusive, and tried to get our mother
Hmm.
um, to just let her guard down and connect with me. But so I ultimately met her, but she just couldn't. She couldn't let go of the shame. Couldn't go there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you and your siblings, you and your siblings on your father's side and your mother's side
Mhm. Yeah.
have a good relationship.
Yep. 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 We do. We talk and we email and we visit, and I was so grateful for that. It really helped. I really learned so much about the other half of myself through my siblings.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that they gave me that connection that I would not have had otherwise. I'm very grateful for that.
Wow. And you still have a relationship with your adopted siblings that you grew up
Yes.
with?
Yeah. One brother has passed away, but I still am in touch, of course, with my younger brother and sister.
Wow.
And my parents, both my adoptive and biological parents have all passed away. So, yeah.
How was it with you meeting your husband and you have children of your own, right?
Yeah, 2 grown sons and expecting our first grandchild in September, so we're very excited. Um, yeah, I have a very supportive and wonderful husband, who was able to sort of deal with all the craziness, the fears that I had and I don't think certainly he was very understanding and gracious. When he met me, I still had some of those fears of doing new things or being out in the middle of nowhere or travel and things. And he supported me through that. Um, and, uh, and as I said, I eventually found help and was able to deal with all those. There are a lot of things, and we've been married for 46 years now. And, I'm, still have a great relationship with him and our 2 sons we're close and wonderful. I look back now and realize there are lots of things I didn't really understand. Um, my husband's family, I didn't understand the connection you had with family. To me, family was like, it's hard to say, but like if he had someone in his family, his mother had a lot of issues and then I sort of didn't understand his loyalty and his connection to her because in my family, everyone was so disjointed and disconnected and sort of nothing held. And it wasn't until actually I met my birth parents and felt for the first time in my life that biological, physical connection to your clan that I really understood the power of family
Mhm.
and understood why when I first met Rick and um, it didn't matter to me. I know some people said, look at someone's family. If you're going to marry them or get look at their family and see And I thought, well, that's not important because in my family, it wasn't important. No one represented anybody else. It was, we were all such individual entities. And I didn't appreciate how much comes through the DNA and how much is family and that strong bond. I was missing that experience. And so there was a lot that I didn't understand about family myself. And um, and now looking back, I can see how it was missing. But I said I just never got it before I experienced it myself.
Wow. Did you have to do any DNA testing or you?
I did eventually. We didn't because the agency had the records, and of course, my birth mother didn't deny that I was her daughter. And also, they in both letters that I sent to first my birth father through the agency and then my birth mother, they asked you to put photographs in, and in each case they went, oh my God, how did this woman get our photo? My sibling said, how did this woman get our baby photos? Because we all look so much alike. I
Oh,
since did it just to see if there were other relatives out there and have connected with relatives. The DNA is great, but you have to have people in your birth family who've done it. And very few members of my either side of my birth families had done either of those genetic testing websites. So I might never have known, but they all said, when they looked at the pictures that came with the letter, they were just, oh my God, she's one of us. And it's very true. I look like both families very much.
wow. That's good. You want to tell us a little bit more about your memoir? And
Sure. Abandoned at birth, searching for the arms that once held me. And I originally titled it The Blood Calls because I was trying to speak to that very physical connection and drive you have to reconnect with your, biological heritage. But the publisher said that sounded like a vampire novel. So I renamed it. Um, and abandoned at birth is because I was emotionally abandoned at birth. I may not have been left on a doorstep, but I was left in the hospital and emotionally abandoned. And then spent my life searching for that a feeling of connection that I thought was there. I didn't realize my mother had never looked at me and never wanted me, and she wasn't searching for me. So I was searching for what I thought would be a wonderful reunion and make me feel whole again. It's sold anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, hopefully your local bookshop. Um, and my website is abandonedatbirthbook.com, and I'm on Instagram at Janet Sherlund Official. But it took 3 years to write, and I was hoping to communicate the feelings of adoption. So I really wrote it to try and be very emotional read, very emotional book where I'm not just telling you the facts or the incidents along the way, but trying to get you to feel it. And I've been so gratified by other adoptees saying, I cried through your book. This is my truth. Or non-adoptees saying, oh, I never realized.
yeah,
And I'm hoping to start these conversations because even though adoption is changing, we still have, again, 40 states with sealed records. We have donor conceived individuals now saying, I need to know more about my father, not just, specimen 1, 2, 3. What's his family like? What's he like? And reproductive rights. There are all sorts of issues that still are really relate to what adoptees go through. And I hope that my book can really help open up conversations about um, a level of understanding that people may not have had before, and they can bring to some of these their decisions on these new issues.
yeah. Have you had any adoptees that have reached out to you for any advice or?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I've had a lot of people reach out on social media, and just at a book signing this past Saturday, a young woman came and she said, oh, your story is my story. There was a magazine article about me that she had read, and she came to the book signing to meet me, and she was just crying. I mean, she said, this is my story too. And like anyone who's been through trauma, especially when it's culturally unrecognized, when you find someone that's also experienced that, they know, and you don't have to try and convince them or go there. It's just you've walked a mile in my shoes. And it's so affirming, and it's such comfort to speak to somebody else who's suffered in that same way. And I was so glad she came to the signing and I was able to meet her.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I was reading yesterday about they found a baby abandoned like in a park. And they have those new laws now. You can leave your baby at a fire station or hospital, and but this baby was left in a park in the heat.
Oh,
And all I could think about, I didn't immediately start blaming. I just started thinking, what was the biological mother going through and father
yeah.
going? And
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this baby left in the
Hmm.
90s, almost 90-degree weather. And they try to bring awareness to this new law, but it just doesn't. People are scared.
Yeah. It isn't, and we will always need adoption. I mean, there's some younger people out there that go, "We got to do away with adoption." Well, there are people who, and unfortunately nowadays, I think many times our our society gives our society would rather give a child to people that have the external, symbols of success. Two parents or the nice roof over their head or whatever. That doesn't mean those people are better parents.
No.
Um, and the I don't think there's ever better parents than the biological parents, but they often now don't have any support or help, or they're suffering themselves from from illness or something that they need support by. And if they're not getting it from their own families, then where do they turn? It's too bad that people in that very emotional and very physically unstable condition of just having had a child
Mhm.
don't know about or understand or respect the the resources that should or might or could be there for them to help keep that family intact. And but if they can't, and if there's really no one, and they need to place that child, there are people that are happy to raise and love someone else, and we're so lucky for that. But we need to make sure they understand what they're taking on when they raise someone else's child. It's not their child, and their name isn't that child's biological heritage. And
Yeah.
we just need to have that. It would be nice to have an adoptive parent say, to talk about your other mother or your first mother, and share pictures maybe, and tell stories, and let that child know. So it's not that we don't need adoption, but we need two things. We need to be more open in adoption, and we certainly need more resources to help families that are in desperate times stay intact and stay together, and respect that it's not how much you have, it's who you are as a parent. And and our society hasn't done a good job. It's not done a good job in that regard. So we need to understand that more, and how important it is to be with your biological family if you can be in any way. You often hear those stories of children who have been traumatized by their parents and still cry for those parents. I mean, there is such a strong bond with family. It's powerful, and we need to respect that.
Yeah, you're right. That's something, and it's something that I was just thinking this would definitely bring awareness for rights for the adoptees and
I hope so. Yeah. And I also say, I had the best possible scenario. I was a white baby, placed with a white family. I I had the least challenges, and I was still traumatized.
yeah.
So you layer other challenges on that, and there's a reason for the high suicide rate, the high addiction rate, the high behavioral issues in adoption. It is really something that you have to deal with in life. And so I hope that, yeah, these conversations will just bring some awareness to these fundamental truths about being human, and what we need, and how better to support that, so that we have, just a healthier, more integrated that we give the best chance we can to the next generation.
Was any of your adoptive siblings interracial of
No,
adoption?
no. And I said, I can't imagine both for international and interracial adoption,
Yeah.
all that they've lost in addition to their name and, oh gosh, just heartbreaking. Brings tears to my eyes to think about what they're struggling against. And despite, again, perhaps being in a family that loves them and wants the best for them. But that's a lot to lose. It's a lot to lose.
Oh. Do you have any lasting words for anyone that's listening that may share a similar story to yours and any
I would say listen to yourself, trust yourself. If you're feeling sad, grieved, different, afraid, those are all normal things to feel in this situation. Respect yourself and find help to process that. A therapist, a teacher, a family member, a minister, whoever you turn to. But and if nothing else, there are a lot of books out there. There's a lot of online platforms now. There are people who will hear your story and you will find affirmation in. So trust yourself and keep seeking and asking questions and finding answers, and you will come through and you'll be stronger and happier for it.
Oh, thank you. Is your book on Audible?
It is, yes. There is also an audiobook out there. It is on Audible as well, the other platforms. Yeah.
Going on Audible today. I'm finna start. Audible is my friend.
Yes, it is. It's a great experience. And it was fun to go record that. That was a new experience too, to be in a recording booth and doing that for a couple days. So
Oh, so you did your own.
I did. Yeah, they wanted they say for memoirs, they really like having the author read the book. And so I did it. Yeah. And I have lots of friends that are using the audiobook, and it's
Yeah,
interesting to have them. They like hearing my voice tell my story.
definitely. I'm gonna go on there today and I'm start listening because I
Thank
want to
you.
learn more. I only got bits and pieces. And this was a beautiful story. I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. I will leave your information and contact, how to contact you in the details of this episode. And Miss Sherlund, I'm sure you'll touch someone with this. Is anyone that's listening or viewing this, I know someone will be touched. You've touched me. Like it's like a totally different mindset of, you know, someone has been adopted.
Well, thank you. And thank you for our conversation. I really appreciate your interest and your sharing this message.
Yes. Thank you. And y'all that is not subscribed to Live Conversations with Dr. Amy, hit that like button, subscribe, share. You'll be blessed. Thank you.